79, I'm surprised that I'm getting to do what I get to do. And they even pay me for it.
You've been trained to meet with people, be present with people. What does that mean?
It's like I am entering their world. I'm a coach, so I listen to people's story, figure out where they are, where they want to go, and why they're stuck.
And you can't work through that unless you know your story.
I think understanding your story is the key to life.
Terry, great to see you.
Thank you.
It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
What's it feel like to have these cameras in your office and us with you today?
Actually, it's been a great feeling. A lot of thought about this, a lot of work you've done to preparation. It's been incredible. You've read all the books. You've talked to my wife, Charlotte. You've talked to the people who run Coaching Life Matters, Rusty and Ron, and you're connected, and I feel like we're connected. You know, we've had lunch together. We've had time together. I feel very excited about just sitting here having a conversation.
I hear you.
Good conversation is good, always good.
It feels good, and it feels natural.
Yes.
You've been meeting with people, helping them, serving them close to, what, right at 53 years, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've seen over 15,000
I
individuals?
don't know how to count. I just know that since 1965, working with teenagers, and then 10 years on the college campus, coaching, counseling, teaching, 10 years in Boston. I meet one-on-one, and so I don't, some people said 10,000 people's stories, but I don't know. It's a bunch.
But the numbers don't matter to you?
No, I don't keep record or keep count of that.
But there is a sense of experience and redundancy that validates your thoughts, your work at this stage. Is that fair?
Well, I think the word redundancy.
Not in a negative way. I didn't mean
Okay, well, I just
in a repetitive way.
Well, just trained to see people and to see the person. And I've had great mentors and great models who modeled for me how to be with a person. So when I'm sitting down with a person, like I am with you right now, I'm looking at you and listening to you and processing with you. So to learn to be present with a person over the years has been a process and been a training. So training to listen, training to be present, and I've heard, I can't even repeat the stories that I've heard.
And you have your doctorate
Yes.
in personality and religion and culture from Boston University, is that right? And you have 2 master's degrees.
Yes. Now, just a caveat on that, all those degrees.
Is there any other degrees that I left out?
Oh no, what I'm saying is, I'm very grateful for the study, and knowledge has been a very important thing for me to try to figure out how to be a human being. So I've never been one to seek academic degrees, but it seemed like on the journey, like I was 47 when I started the doctorate at Boston University, and it was a wonderful experience. And
is there any benefit to getting those degrees, even though you're not an academic?
Well, yes. Well, first of all, I've taught in the university setting and taught in graduate schools. These academic credentials provide me the opportunity to go to the academic arena and do adjunct. I've taught graduate classes.
So they would write you off if you didn't have that?
Well, they wouldn't let you teach unless you have the academic credentials. You couldn't qualify. They wouldn't. But I'm qualified to do that and have done it, but I've not been in the academic arena.
Was it painful or frustrating going through that academic training? Or was it helpful? Like, did you know it was a necessary thing at the time to do what you wanted to do?
Well, it's to get the doctor's degree I would say was painful. It put me it's like you're driving a car and it's easy to drive in 5th gear. It puts me in 2nd gear and I'm having to grind it. But because I saw the end where I wanted to go, I knew I had to do that to get to where I want to go. So you do things that you don't want to do because of where you want to go. And so learning Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic. I'm not a linguist person, but I needed to do that to get the degree, to get to do what I wanted to do.
Right.
And so, yes, it's a grind.
When you see people, you said earlier, through your mentors, through your experience, you've been trained to see people. You've been
Yes.
trained to meet with people, be present with people.
Yes.
What does that mean?
It's really a good question.
That's my job.
Well, human beings are the most amazing. When I'm with a person, Sam, it's like I'm entering their world. When I do what I call the core story in mapping people's story, I enter their world the first 18 years and I live in it. I experience it. And so as I ask questions, they tell me about their father or their mother or their uncle, their aunts or brothers and sisters or community. I'm living it. I'm experiencing. I'm a visual person. And so when people describe things, I'm listening with my head, with my heart, and with my gut. So it's just an incredible experience to listen to somebody tell their own story, and they benefit because they've got a person sitting there listening to them that really is paying attention to what they're saying.
When you think about the 10,000, 15,000 people or couples, I guess it's my assumption that you're meeting with people that are looking for answers within their own life. Is that true?
Yeah, there are
people. Is that true every time?
People are hurting. People are confused. People are lonely. People are afraid. People are stuck, and they don't know why. So when I talk to people and get to me, they're eager to figure out what's going on and how to go forward.
So you're not talking to people that feel like they've got life figured out.
No.
Something I saw in 2020, this is from a reputable data source, but 41 million people saw some sort of therapy or counseling in 2020.
Yeah.
Does that surprise you?
No.
That's almost 15%.
And Sam, the reason I do what I do, and I don't charge, but who can pay $150 an hour for a therapist, for a counselor?
Not
People can't do it. What my aim is provide, first of all, good information and safety, and people have the time to tell their story, and then provide resources for people. Say, I'm not a therapist. I have done that, but I chose not to be a therapist. I'm a life coach. I'm trained, but I help people figure out where they are, where they want to go, and why they're stuck. And then I'll point them to resources. And we've got resources. The books that we've got, the videos, are stories about people who've overcome. And that's a good word I just have tagged in the last few days, is overcomers. I'm an overcomer. And I've got coaching tips. It'd be kind of like this when my daughters were teenagers. Teenage girls don't want to hang out with their dad, but I taught them to play tennis. And so they had tennis lessons so that, when they might want to play tennis, I would be available. So one day my oldest daughter took a tennis lesson, or was taking lessons, and she couldn't take it. So I took a lesson from a real pro. Now, I played high school and college tennis, but this guy was a pro. And I told him, I said, I want you to train me to hit a topspin backhand. My backhand has been like that. I said, I want to learn how to hit that ball, rip it. And I hit with him, and then he called me over and he says, give me your racket. So I handed him my racket. He said, I want you to turn it down like this. I want you to drop the racket. And when the ball comes, I want you to visualize ripping the face off the ball. Well, I'm a coach, so I listen to people's story, and I've got coaching tips. I've got a lot of education on this side, but I've got a lot of life experience. And so I listen for coaching tips. They want to move through an obstacle. but they don't know how. And so I'm a coach, and I will give them tips that make sense to life.
You've done work in 12 countries, right?
Yes.
One of those being India, another
Yes.
being Israel,
Right.
another South America.
Right.
From a trauma standpoint, is there a correlation like between, let's say, somebody that's growing up in a very oppressed environment,
Right.
or let's take somebody that's growing up in a Western advanced
Right.
country that might experience more luxury or more privilege in certain ways? Is there a difference between the path or the journey
Mm-hmm.
for each of these types of people that are located in different parts of the world, or are there common denominator similarities with each person, regardless of what their background is, what their experiences have been, and ultimately what they want out of their own life?
Yeah. Well, everybody's the same in some things. Like, for example, when I listen to a story, every human being functions on 3 levels: with their head, with their heart, or their gut. And that's true in South America, it's true in Israel, it's true in India, it's true, it's just human. And so when I listen to people's story and I map their stories, I help them identify, by the time they're 12 years old, what they've figured out that they need to do to be secure or to survive in their world. And they'll name that belief. The second thing is, what do you need to do to be valued, to be significant, to be seen as important? And I'll say, complete this sentence. What I figured out I need to do to be valued is, what I figured out that I need to do to be secure or to survive is, and what do I need to do to have some control over how people look at me? And whether they're in India or Israel or Guyana or Nicaragua. For example, in Nicaragua, here's a 40-year-old man. I mapped his story and I said, now what I figured out that I need to do to survive is, you know what he said? Of course you don't know. I was shocked. He said an AK-47. So here's a 12-year-old, to survive in his world, has to pack an AK-47. In the Western culture, I say, what I figured out that I need to do to survive in the world is, and I'll hear him say, be perfect. I said, okay. What do I need to do to be valued, to be counted? I hear, perform to please, be the best, be smart, be pretty, look good. And so in each of those categories, that's a universal thing. Wherever you are in the world, is a child, by the time they're 12 years of age, makes 3 decisions around security, around significance, around power and control. Naming those beliefs helps them understand. So what happens when you get under stress? Whether you're in Guyana or India or Israel, you go back to those 12-year-old beliefs.
Because that makes you feel control.
It worked for you as a kid.
How does that work?
Well, the AK-47 worked and it protected his family. You know, be smart, be the smartest worked for the kid when he was a little boy. Now he's running a president of a company. Achievement. He's got to achieve. So the problem with those beliefs are not bad as a child, and they're not even bad as an adult, but they're toxic as an adult if you depend on, for example, what I figured out that I need to do to control people. I hear humor, be funny. Well, if you've been married a few years, telling a joke at the wrong time is just not real good.
Yeah.
You know, so it's insightful to understand how you operate under stress. And you don't want a 12-year-old running your life when you're 40.
And you can't work through that unless you know your story.
I believe understanding is the key to life. I think understanding your story is the beginning.
So from a head, a heart, and a gut standpoint,
Right.
is that rooted in any research or any teaching that you've referenced before that kind of helps you,
Well,
where that really influenced your work?
well, knowledge is the key, and across the board in all kind of therapeutic practices in the field of psychology, they all identify the head, the heart, and the gut. Those are three dimensions. Now, I've done some reading and study in personality. One of the key writers that helps me, a guy named Thomas Keating, who writes about personality. Thomas Merton speaks of the false self. Carl Jung talks about the shadow, what you take with you. So it doesn't matter what you know, what you do is what you believe. Now, I take it a little deeper, Sam. After I map the story and they're looking at all the relationships, and it's all laid out in this book, the Core Story book we just finished, is I'll say, okay, picture yourself, and usually if it's a husband or wife or a group, and you put your arm around your 12-year-old. Now tell your 12-year-old how you were wounded. So it takes them back to their 12-year-old, and they visually kind of put their arm around their 12-year-old. And for example, and I would say, my 12-year-old, I was abandoned, you know. My mother left us about 9, didn't see her for 18 years. Dad married again. Both my mother and my stepmother were mentally ill in some ways. We're really wonderful people, but had trauma that they hadn't worked through. So I experienced my being abandoned as a 12. So then I take it a little deeper. I said, now, down in your gut, what's the lie? Now, this is very significant, what I'm about to tell you, is there's a lie. Children are the best recorders and worst interpreters.
What do you mean by that?
That means you record events, and you look at them, and you come to a conclusion. Out of these events, for example, my mother left me, my father couldn't be there, so one interpretation is, I'm just not good enough. Or for my particular lie was, well, can't count on my mama, can't count on my daddy. I'm responsible. So at 12 years old, I'm working. I've got a job, and I'm at 12.
So those thoughts reinforce
Yes.
these beliefs about yourself. And if you don't have someone to come in at a key point of intervention and share with you truth, then you're going to continue to reinforce these beliefs and these behaviors. And then that's just going to deepen their neuroplasticity in your brain. And then therefore, you'll continue to stay on this path. And you're saying that's the value of someone like yourself that's coming in, that can care and learn and see someone with their story, regardless where in the world they are or whatever they do or what their situation is, and help them see actual truth. And then as a result, when they feel love and impacted, they're going to see a better way.
Well, yes. In the field of psychology, Freud and Jung, and you just go back through, there's an unconscious self. What the Core Story does, it helps people name the unconscious lie. And here's what I believe. 95% of our behavior is driven by an unconscious lie. And so what do people do? They perform either be strong, be tough, be perfect, be the best, look good, be funny, to control their external environment. So people are doing external things to take care of an internal problem.
So your unconscious self is formed up until around the age of 12, but your unconscious self is formed and rooted out of these experiences and the core lie that you're saying that you can tell yourself.
Yeah.
And then that's what can put people on a trajectory of living with a lot of pain or a lot of negative thoughts about their own self, or be motivated to do things for reasons that are harmful to them in the end.
I'm saying that by the time you're 12, people solidify, they anchor a unconscious lie that under stress, as an adult, rules. Unless, and here's the key, so you got the core beliefs, you've got the wound, and you have the lie, And then I said, now let's talk about the core truth. Let's talk about what you know is true. And I'm going to give you 5 options. I have immeasurable value. I am loved. I am not alone. I am forgiven. Or I'm a gift. And so I want you to pick one of those 5, or if you can come up with one as equally good, then whatever that is. And sometimes people do.
And so, but that's the gospel. That's the truth that you've referenced.
Well, this is where religion has really screwed the whole thing up. Pardon my French. It puts a veil over, you got to be perfect. How many people say, well, I can't go to church, I'm just not good enough? Because the message that religion has presented to the world, as I see it, has been a performance level, a measuring up, or be good enough. And I deal with people coming out of religions, and the thing that's tying up so many religious people, I'm not perfect, I'm not good enough, I'm less than. So the child growing up in a religious environment interprets that environment as I'll never get there.
And religion validates the harm or reinforces the
Many
harm.
times, and then there's incredible abuse among authorities in religion, and you can look at the different religious things and in the news to see where pastors or priests or people who sit in authority have abused children.
And there's thoughts there that really those behaviors that are atrocious are rooted in people's own story and their own either lack of opportunity or their own choice not to know their own story. So then therefore that's how they create harm in those ways.
Yeah.
In religion. And for the sake of our interview and for anyone that's watching this, you spent 20 plus years working with a church. Before that, you ran a Christian center at a university. So your experience is very dynamic. So you have years, close to 3 decades of working within the church community. So you've seen this from a detached standpoint, both in and out of it. Is that fair?
Yes. I've never been what's called a pulpit minister. My work has always been really one-on-one or forming groups. So I mentioned to you before that 4 things I believe a person needs to heal, particularly trauma. They need good information, they need safety, they need time, and they need friends. And friends is the operative word here. You know, my view of church would be it's relationship. It's not a building somewhere or people who gather in a big mega church. They're in community and they build friendships and they know each other's stories. For example, in my work, one of the things that I've done, I even moved to Nashville 28 years ago, was I was hired to help build community where they were going to church, but they didn't have friends. So I was training people how to be in groups to listen to each other's stories. And I showed them how to map the stories and actually listen, and they get in conversation with their story and the story of the good news that they're loved, they're forgiven, they have immeasurable value.
You've been able to do this work inside of a system like that and seen its impact.
And until I wasn't fitting the model.
Yeah.
When I wasn't trying to get them to church. And see, that's the problem that I've had with church, is that when my goal has not been to get them in our group, my goal has been for them to see what they're worth and their value and that they're loved, and then watch them grow. And they may be in your church and they may not. And my goal has not been to get them to church. My goal has been to get them to understand the good news that they're beloved at their worst. That's the good news. Church sometimes it's difficult because the people don't know they're trying to get them into church and trying to get them to God. And my goal is to get them to love, which is how I define God.
Yeah. When I say the word trauma,
okay,
how would you define that?
Oh my goodness. I'll tell you a story of trauma. I'll call him Peter, was a child of a marriage from the Holocaust. Both the mother and the father were in Auschwitz. He was the butcher, she was the maid. She would give him cigarettes. He would give her food. They got married afterwards. They had a son. When I mapped this man's story in Israel, the only good thing that he could say about his father, or his mother really, was that she kept the father from killing him. So here's a story where that's trauma. Now, that's the worst kind of trauma.
What does it mean? Significant pressure or pain that's inflicted on someone that's not just appropriate, nor is it beneficial to their proper upbringing or maturity. Is it? I mean,
okay. Let's put it this way: a significant emotional experience. And when I meet people and I find that trauma, then my job as a coach is to help get them to the resources that they need, which are books, which are good therapists. They're great trauma therapists out there. I don't do long-term therapy. I've done that before and realized that's not what I can do. I find my gift is to help people understand where they are, come up with a plan of how to get there where they want to go. But the ancient proverb says, though it cost all you have, get understanding. Trauma is universal. Everybody has trauma. Now, Peter in Auschwitz but in India was the same thing. I did 40 stories 1 month of sex traffic trade, where the parents sold their daughter into sex traffic trade. It's unbelievable, incomprehensible. And that's trauma. So on my website, there's a video with Gino Griganti, who was dropped behind the lines 3 weeks after 9/11 in Afghanistan in the desert. And I met him and I heard his trauma. And you can hear that story on my website. It's called Breathe. It's a 5-minute documentary. That's trauma.
So you're saying trauma, these themes, it's a significant emotional response to something that is not right to a certain degree.
Well, here's my conclusion about trauma. This is my conclusion about a human being. And this is where I'll stand on this one. This is what Coaching Life Matters is all about. There's nothing in the world more important than a human being. And what that means is there is no trauma, there's no pain that you can be handed that you're not greater than. Human beings are the most incredible things on the planet. And I've seen people in trauma rise up like this man I call Peter. And so one of the things I do, for example, I'll have the story mapped and I say, now look on the board, let's put a star by anybody in your story who you experienced valuing you. Could be your grandmother, could be your dog, could be your horse. One guy was a library when he just was sent off to the library and he read books. So the stars were the library. But when there are no stars, and there are no stars, and I go to that board and I put a red star on their name, and I say, looking them in the eye, you're amazing. There's nothing in the world greater than a human being, and you're a human being. And the very fact that you're here, alive, and I watch them light up because they can see their greatness right in the middle of the most hellish, darkest place. And I watch them get up. And I love to give tools to people when they decide to fight.
So I've heard before from professionals in this space. I don't know the statistic, how many, it doesn't matter, but I have heard this, that for people that have experienced significant trauma at a young age, the odds of them recovering to a certain degree are very small. In other words, those experiences, the way I interpreted what I heard was the deck stacked against you from a recovery standpoint. And I'm not saying that's a common belief. I'm just saying that is an argument that I've heard. But what I'm hearing you say is you've seen a lot of success. There's stories that you've been a part of where you've seen people that have experienced terrible things, a lot of trauma at a young age, but they've chosen to know their story and walk through it. And you've seen them to some degree get to the other side of it. Not that life never stops being challenging, but you see them have meaning, you see them have joy, and you see them work through these things that have, where their subconscious has kind of hindered their life in a lot of ways. Is that true?
Yes, and I hate it when people give these statistics. Well, your odds are against you. There's not going to be any hope for you. I worked in prisons, Sam. We had a group called the Academy of the Wild Ones over here in prison, and there were 11 women. One of them was a transgender, and what I do is bring them in a group, and I map their stories. And after they see each other's and hear each other's story, just the first 18 years, I watch the compassion and the kindness and the gentleness that these women extend to one another. At the end of that 11 weeks, you know who they talk about that's great?
Who?
Each other, not me. I just facilitate them seeing each other. They see each other's trauma. They see, well, you were beat when you were bullied when you were in middle school. Or it was your grandfather that raped you as a little kid. And he did the same thing. And they interact with compassion. So I see that. And part of what we're about, I'm 79. Well, you know, my dad lived to 74, my mother to 77. You know, I'm on the back end of this deal. So my commitment is to provide resources. That's why the books are written. That's why about marriage we write. That's why Charlotte and I do seminars on marriage. Here's resources. We're putting together resources that you can take and do what I do.
Can you give an example of? You've talked about Holocaust survivors. You've talked about sex trade victims.
Yes.
I haven't yet heard you give an example of somebody, let's say a physician, an attorney, a banker, an artist,
Okay.
somebody that might be well educated,
Yes.
somebody that might have achieved the American dream to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question, and I would love to tell you. One of the joys that I have is with people that are just stuck.
What does stuck mean?
Stuck means they just keep working hard to be the best. They keep working hard to achieve. They keep working hard to be strong. And they reach in their 40s. You've heard what's called a midlife crisis.
Oh, yes.
So people hit
I know a few people that
they hit a wall.
I don't follow
they hit
pattern.
a wall, and these are amazing people. They hit a wall and they don't know what's happening to them. It happened to me in my 40s. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And so people hit walls. You get them in a setting where they understand their stories, and I've seen this. So I give these terrible traumatic things because that's the place I've gone, but a lot of my work is with people that are just trying to get the most out of life, and they need some information they don't have about how to be present with their wife. There are books, there are resources on how to build a better marriage. In the book, Being Better at Being Married that we wrote, there are 50 conversations that couples can have. So we're not just going after the deeply trauma victims, but they're people who are able to look good on the outside, but inside they're miserable in their marriage. And with a little coaching, a little understanding, some coaching tips, I've seen them break through and not give up on each other.
What are they feeling? Like when you say miserable, like if they're driving,
they're feeling alone.
If they're on the airplane traveling like for business, or if they're taking the kids to carpool, or if she's going to work on her commute, what is she feeling?
She feels alone. She feels disconnected. She's been married, she's got 5 children, and she feels like she's over here and her husband's over here. and there's no connection.
Her heart.
They're just not connected. It's like apples and oranges. They don't know how to talk.
Is that where people start to be interested in someone else?
That's when they're vulnerable. That's right. That's when they're vulnerable, and they just need a human touch, and they can't seem to get that connection with their mate. And so if they don't have a personal sense of integrity and boundaries, they don't even ask the question. They just get relief. Now, that's happening all the time. That's out there. Let me give you an illustration. I was listening to a radio talk show guy one evening, and he was asking the question, why are so many people getting a divorce? And he's getting all kinds of answers. Well, the chemistry's not there. We just don't, it's not there. We got kids. We're going different directions. And we just end it. And finally he said, Sam, he said, I'm sick of hearing it. Is there anybody out there having a good time? Well, I've been married 30 years with grandchildren. I call the guy on the phone. I get him. You don't get the radio talk guy when you call. I've never been able to get the guys, but I got this guy.
Yeah, I don't even listen to the radio.
Well, riding home, I was listening to the radio. It's a talk show. So the guy says, okay, well, you got a secret? I said, yeah, I think I do. He said, well, what is it? I said, I don't make my wife responsible for my happiness. I own that one. And he got real quiet. He said, that makes sense. Until a human being takes ownership for their life, for their own person, they don't find their way. They're always looking for something external, a mate, a woman, a man, a job, a degree, so that they will feel better about themselves. When a person owns their life and says, I'm going to have to figure this thing out, and starts looking and seeking, that's when they begin to find. And they don't lay the burden of responsibility for their happiness on another human being. Marriages that work, that come alive to joy, are people who own their life. It's like Khalil Gibran said in his book, The Prophet. He said, it's like an oak tree and a cypress tree that don't stand in one another's shadow, or two strings on an instrument that play the same music, but they don't touch. There's a separateness, but the person who feels distant from the mate, that is a reality in many relationships. But if this person owns their life and is not controlled by the other person's distance, there's an amazing attraction that this person has to this person, because they're still loving them. They're still choosing to love them. But they're still choosing to love. And love draws. And I've seen marriages who were good marriages, good people, well professional people. But when one person takes ownership and lives in joy and in love, and begins to treat the other person who's maybe being a jackass, and they love them anyway, and that's real attractive.
What happens, let's say you're working with somebody in India,
Okay.
and let's say their situation is more restrictive, maybe, than what a system that somebody might be in under the United States. Or let's say another country, or even let's say it's in a very restrictive, unfortunate, oppressive situation here in the United States. Is there always hope? Is there always a chance? I guess because essentially what you're describing here is ownership and agency. To know your story, to walk through things, to be seeking. But what about when with some of life's most dismal circumstances or situations? How can people have ownership when they're in situations that are more difficult than what a lot of people experience?
Okay, here's a fundamental belief that I have. There's always hope. Always. When I'm with a person and I see them and they experience being seen, they experience being heard, they experience being treated with the kind of dignity and respect that I get to do, I see light. I see hope. The circumstances do not dictate nor define human value.
Every situation.
Every
There's
situation.
hope. What about, I know your mother, I read your book, your mother, you said in your book, your mother came from money. I know your high school girlfriend, I know it's a very I don't want to go into that story in depth, but I know that her father, was affluent, etc. What's just from your experience? I know you work with very talented professionals, people that have run large organizations,
Right.
have built great companies, and I know you believe in the dignity of each person, regardless of what their vocation is or where they're from. But what misconceptions have you seen with people that come from or have a lot of wealth? And how is that in any way? Are there things that you've seen that block someone from knowing their own story or living with this type of joy that you're describing that you've seen play out throughout your 53 years of work?
Well, I think there's an upper class ghetto. When my girlfriend's father, who owned half the Delta, took his life, um, and then she, 6 years later, took her life with the same gun. And then another child in that same family took their life. Uh, um, and it's so interesting that the day that I found out that my girlfriend took her life, um, my professor in the graduate school died suddenly of an aneurysm. He was 49. And I had just found my mother that I hadn't seen in 18 years, who had been married 5 times and was living with a man that wasn't her husband when Charlotte and I knocked on her door, and she didn't know who I was. She thought I was the number 4 son. I'm number 2. And as I sat there, and a buddy of mine who just finished his doctorate at Vanderbilt came over and sat down with me, and he looked at me and he said, "Terry, I had 2 or 3 questions I wished I could have asked my professor." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, you know what he would say. You were with him. We had 3 years. He'd have coffee with him. He'd ride around his sports car and he'd have dinner with him." And I said to him, "You know what he would say." And he looked at me and he smiled and he nodded because he'd been with him. I didn't know his question was, can I believe with integrity that Jesus rose from the dead? So he goes off, gets another doctorate degree in Greek and processes that question. And I'm sitting there, and this is what I said to him. I said, "You know, we ought to know the mind of Christ so well that at any point, fork in the road, we'd know how he'd respond." And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we nodded. He went to the Eiffel Tower, the academic Eiffel Tower, and I went and found my mother, and I said, "I'm going to find out if this Christ works in the darkest place of hell." And I spent the next 6 years walking in and out of psychiatric rehabs, alcoholic rehabs with my mother. And I watched her come to life because somehow I was able to give her hope. And she looked, not at religion, because there wasn't room in the church for an alcoholic like my mother, but a bunch of college students took her in. And then a mentor of mine took my mother in and walked with her where she experienced being valued, because she was full of shame and guilt because she abandoned 4 children. And I watched her come to life because of the teachings of the Christ. And this is why I'm keen on not talking a whole lot about Jesus, particularly in a religious environment, because every crime that's ever been committed has been committed in his name. And so I take the teachings of Jesus and bring them to the ground. And I get to meet one-on-one with a human being and see them. But I learned that from the Christ in the documents of the New Testament.
Yeah. What? Why does trauma affect our thoughts?
Because that's where we live. It's where we live. You know, I've got 4 daughters. Guess what? I couldn't rob them of trauma. Everybody has trauma. And so people have different levels of trauma in Israel and India. But my girlfriend, who went around the world, lo and behold, she didn't know she had trauma, but all of a sudden life hits and he loses all his money, and so he kills himself. Now she's got real trauma.
So, can someone live fully if they don't understand their story?
Oh, I would say dadgummit, you know, my brother lived fully. It's my older brother. He was traumatized. He's a great man, but he had some stomach problems because you take and you bury it. And my brother was an overcomer, but he had Alzheimer's for the last 8 years of his life.
But he didn't know his story, is what you're saying.
Well, my brother hadn't processed. Some people don't process.
So you're saying there's a degree of healing that you can only get when you know your own story.
Yes, I think there's a richness when you process your story in safe places. And not everybody gets to do that. I got to do that. And I get to help some people. People who don't do it doesn't mean they don't live fully and have a wonderful life. But I think it's a whole lot easier when you understand and you forgive yourself and you forgive other people and you get off your back and you get off other people's back.
So take somebody that's watching this interview.
Okay.
And some things that have been shared have resonated with them, things they've been thinking about for a while. I mean, even personally, I've done a little bit of work with you,
Right.
but I've done a lot of work with others as well.
Right.
So personally, I can understand and relate to the pain, to experiences, and the freedom from knowing your story. Because then it's cleansing, it's healing. You feel love. You see relationships, you feel dignity in how you're made. And then you feel agency to some degree.
Right.
On choices in the story that you're believing.
Right.
But what are some of the things of 10 to 15,000 people or more, which honestly, my gut would tell me you've met with more than 15,000 people or individuals or families because you're the kind of person that doesn't like metrics. What are the things that you've seen time and time again where someone maybe feels uncomfortable about the choice of doing this work, of believing that getting to know their story or working with you or someone else that does this work like you do is worth it? What do they have to get over?
Okay. Well, first of all, I just got a tool and I've learned some skills and I'm going to give it away. Most Americans don't even have one friend. I would say, if you want to begin the process, just get one friend and ask your life questions and be honest and seek, and you'll find your way. Some may find their way to me, or hopefully, probably not to me because I'm on my way out, but hopefully we're leaving some tools, some videos. I mean, people can do this. You can do this. I mean, I did a story of one man one time, and he went back and he did 250 stories. He got them in groups, and people started processing. So I think this is a tool to help people process and understand their story. It's just another piece amidst all the opportunities, and we've got some really good resources. But find one friend and begin to talk about your life questions. And if you can find a few others who aren't trying to manipulate you or get you in their box, but who are just seeking and searching. And out of that process, when you put human beings together that are really seeking and they're good friends, it's like a friendship. Friend is someone who's always glad to see you, has no immediate plans for your improvement. So you get somebody like that, and you begin to move, and things open up, and you begin to find knowledge. You begin to find information.
But what about, I'm trying to go back to, if something that's been said here resonates and appeals to someone,
Okay.
and they have a choice,
Right.
to get this story work done on their own life, to look at their core beliefs,
Right.
to look at their core lie, to see the ways that they tried to
Right.
kind of master their own fate at a young age. What do they wrestle with, or I imagine for some it's not an easy decision to be like, I'm gonna go meet with you. I'm gonna spend a half day with you. I'm gonna put my life story up on the board, and I'm gonna have to bring up everything.
Right.
What I'm just from your experience of all these people, what do they have to get over
Yeah.
to start the process emotionally?
Yeah,
right?
let me give you a little story that would relate to that. This buddy of mine who did 250 stories, he went back to North Carolina. His name was Bill Roberts, and Bill did his daughter's story. And you know what she said? Well, so what? Now what do I do with that? And I thought, what a great question. And so we, meeting together with a few guys, put together some what we call a heart table, where it's 40 story prompters where people get together with a group, they do their stories, and then they begin to talk about their journey, and they learn from one another. And so the heart table material on our website can lead people to get 6 or 8 people together just listening to each other. And just all you need is a few of honest seekers. And you know what? You can find them. You go to the coffee shops. Why do people go to the bar? What's the happy hour all about? That's where the real action takes place, is in the happy hour. Well, we just need to provide some happy hours for some people to get together, not necessarily get drunk and out of their brain and spend all their money and don't pay for their family bills. Let's bring people together around the table and tell their stories.
What's the benefit for these trained professionals? I mean, earlier we talked about, I think there's 106,000 licensed therapists in the United States, and there's 41 million people in 2020 that got help. How many of those people do you think are actually bringing story into the people that they're trying to serve and help?
Well, first of all, there are great therapists out there, incredible therapists, and they do a lot of great work. They're Jungian therapists or Rogerian. There's different, all kinds of, just somebody to listen and process. That's helpful to people. But I'll tell you, it's a dimension that people don't deal with and they aren't trained to deal with. That's PhD psychologists. And I'll give you an illustration. Buddy of mine flew an A-6 intruder during the Vietnam War, bombed and killed hundreds of people. He didn't fly into military places. He flew into places where there are human beings, men, women, and children. When he finished the military and he realized that he had bombed and killed hundreds of people, he went into what's called PTSD. And he was going crazy. He was a retired 10-year veteran of the Navy. And he went to a therapist. They mapped his story. When he told him that he had killed 400 men, women, and children, the therapist said, I can't help you. You have a spiritual problem. He said, I can't help you. What I love about the therapist, he was honest, he had integrity, because he was sitting on incredible guilt and he was tempted to take his life. There was a spiritual intervention that takes place in his life that he can tell. So there is a spirit world. The Western culture doesn't acknowledge as much the spirit world, but you go to Africa, you go to Guyana, you go to Nicaragua, where there's a spirit world. And we in the Western culture need to wake up. There's good information about spiritual things. And one of the things we do in Coaching Life Matters is we acknowledge that dimension of personality. There's physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. Well, there's historical information about somebody who dealt with trauma, and that was Jesus Christ. But most people don't know the story because they think they do because they grew up in church.
So you're saying from a professional standpoint, I guess I'm curious, let's say there's a trained mental health professional
Right.
that's watching this.
Right.
And let's say they don't have a heavy focus of story with some sort of degree of the recovery of the people that they're meeting with and serving. Is there a benefit? What's the benefit for them to try to understand from your work, from the amount of people that you've seen, about the importance of this story work and how it helps people really recover and really grow as human beings and kind of seek the peace and joy that they're looking for?
Well, first of all, most therapists are about story. They're all about story. The piece that we bring that could be helpful is what's called the core story. It's, and many of you are familiar with the genogram, which was actually developed by a psychiatrist named Murray Bowen, who was actually an atheistic psychiatrist. And he developed the genogram, which is family systems. And when people go to graduate work in social work or in psychology, many of them will learn what's called the genogram to understand family system and the generational pathology that is handed down. The core story tool acknowledges all that, the pathology, but it points a way out to process those lies. That pathological lie that I'm worthless, I'm not good enough, I don't matter, that there's to name it and put it on a board where they could visually see it. Now you've got an enemy that you know who you're after. And there's a process that we reveal of the dismantling. It's a process. There are other processes. This is not the only one, but it is a tool that's worked.
And this is also addressing the multi-generational family system that one's a part of.
That's exactly right. My heart is the incredible therapists that are fighting for people out there. This is not a put down. We're hoping we can have an add to. Just along the way, we're learning. And this, having thousands of people, is what we've honed in as a sharpened tool that when you sit for 1 hour with a person, you can listen and map their story and they can look at it. It's cognitive, it's visual, and it's experiential. And then you're processing with them with real language. Most people, Sam, don't have the language to talk about their life, to talk about the core beliefs or the wound or the lie or the core truth. The core story gives language, but it gives them their language. It's not me putting my language on them. It's they're telling me.
Are there any examples that come to mind of any trained professionals that you've worked with that have implemented this work in a more specific way?
Yes.
That's created a lot of value.
Yes.
Can you give me an example?
One of them is Steve Meeks. When I was working on the university campus in the 70s, here's a young guy who had a dream to be a missionary. So he goes to Africa and spends 10 years as a missionary, and he comes back and he goes to Appalachians, the poorest place in the United States, up here in East Tennessee. And so 25 years later, I'm in a meeting with a bunch of young people, and here's this guy comes up to me, and it's Steve Meeks. And he said, he starts telling me these stories. He has started a drug rehab center up in East Tennessee, and he's doing the story. We began to talk several years ago. He uses the core story all the time. I acknowledge him in the front of this book as one of the resources. He uses the core story and trains people to do it. He said, I'm going to Texas in February, and I'm going to train them to do the core stories. He's training people how to do it.
Have you been criticized for this work?
Yes.
For the story?
Yeah, I am. I don't pay any attention to it.
Because you feel like it's unfounded?
I don't have time for it. Why should I spend time talking to people, trying to prove them something when I got people that are needing to be encouraged? Yeah. So who am I going to talk to? The guy that criticized me or the guy that's saying, hey, would you help me? So I don't have time.
But you've seen the benefit.
Absolutely.
So it's not.
I've seen the benefit in my own life.
Yeah.
I was 51 before I named my lie.
But you've seen the benefit in at least 10,000, 15,000 people.
I would say yes, but I would say I've learned, it's kind of like you put a seed in the ground and you water it, but you don't dig it up and see if it's growing. You do what you believe is right. You treat people with the kind of respect, and some people I never see again. I've had people come back 10 years later and say, I'm ready to talk about that.
What are some examples of how children get power and control, but then it harms them or it sabotages them as adults?
Well, personally, my core belief.
Is there anybody you can,
I can talk about my own life.
What about from others? Can you speak to anything to that?
Well, people use humor in a marriage. Humor is a great control. People love to be around people that are funny. Growing up, you just get somebody humorous, and underneath that person is a lot of pain. That humor hides a lot of pain.
That's how they cope with it.
That's how they cope with their pain. And so they get in a marriage, they get in the conflict, and their wife is hurting, and they pull some joke. And you do that enough times, and the wife feels not heard, not seen, not cared about. And that can destroy a marriage. And I've seen it.
Something that impressed me, or didn't impress me, that's probably the wrong word. Something that stuck out to me was part of my preparation for this work. I had the opportunity of having 2 separate meetings, well, actually multiple meetings with one person, but one of these individuals who's head of your board, was CEO of a hospital.
Right.
Has had a very long and impactful career through hospital administration.
Right.
Another person who's also on your board was a very creative, disciplined, and innovative
Yes.
businessman.
Right.
And that's just 2. So I know there's other men and women, obviously, that I haven't met. But it was interesting to what they talked about from a professional standpoint, from a vocation. And given the amount of time that all of us spend, it doesn't matter if we're in business, if we're an artist, if we're creative, if we're a homemaker, it doesn't matter. But they talked about the importance and the value of knowing your own story from a professional, from a vocational standpoint.
Right.
And that's of interest to me for our conversation, given how much time we spend in that space on a daily basis. Is there anything that comes to mind that you can share about the benefit of knowing your story and how that can impact your life, not just through your own personal life, through your marriage, with your children, et cetera, but also from a career professional standpoint?
Absolutely. I think the 2 people you're talking about are both different from me in every way, in a lot of ways. But when you understand your story, when you meet a person, particularly in the business world, you see them differently. If you understand your own story, you know that they too have a story. And so you're not too quick to judge them. You're not too quick to put them in a box and eliminate them. And in the workplace, in the marketplace, when you call, for instance, someone into your office who works for you, and you're able to really hear them, even the most difficult thing to do is to fire somebody. But you are compassionate, you are kind, and the core story invites you how to be thoughtful and respectful to other people. The core story gives you tools on how to love yourself and be respectful toward yourself, even when you fail. So in the business world, it's very unusual to meet a corporate executive who leads people through the way his leadership style is one of respect, of one of honor, and the employees feel seen, they feel cared about, they feel heard. So understanding your story in the corporate world, if you understand your own story and you know how to receive peace and receive love and you're going to sleep with yourself for the rest of your life. If you don't know how to go to bed and be at peace at night, you're not going to know how to go out and give peace to other people. So it puts someone in the corporate world aware of how to be with the people who work for them.
And make the best decisions?
Yes. And there's a collaboration that takes place. My leadership in the business, and I was in the business world for a while, is there's a collaboration, and you're able to hear other people's voices and hear creative, insightful things. And what understanding your story allows you to embrace people different from you and benefit from their gifts. There are people that work in the business world who have gifts that you don't have.
Does it give you give you more of a clarity of thought too? Or like the opportunity from a place of courage and confidence to execute on certain decisions that you feel like are best when you're able to see things more clearly?
Well, I'll tell you what you're able to do is you're not only able to see them more clearly, it provides a safe place for their giftings to come out. They're thinking clear because they're not on pins and needles of whether I'm going to perform enough that he's going to like me. The leader who can embrace the person and where they feel safe so their creative gifts can come out. So I think knowing your story is critical, and understanding your own story, receiving your own self, gives you a presence to receive other people in the corporate world, and also lifts them up to be able to give what they have to give.
Mm.
And by the way, they love giving to you as the leader because you esteem them and they experience being esteemed and valued.
What happens to somebody, let's say, in their 30s and 40s as they're moving through life? You referenced midlife crisis earlier.
Right.
If they haven't uncovered or spent time to understand their own story, what can happen, I guess?
Life gets worse.
In what way?
Relationships break down.
How?
People have offenses. You get offended by your boss, you get offended by somebody, you're angry, you're bitter. And if you're bitter, the only person you're hurting really is yourself. So you want the snake to bite the other guy who's hurt you, but you hold the poison, you're the one that's dying. So owning your own story allows you to be able to work out relationships. But if you don't deal with your own story, that core lie, I'm not good enough, I'm less, the offenses that people bring against each other, they don't know how to process relationships. And not only in the corporate world, but that's in the religious world. I've seen leaders in churches hold grudges against one another. And because they haven't worked through their own story, they can't go to their brother and say, I was wrong. Or what did I do that hurt you? They cannot do it because they don't know how to receive their own selves. Understanding your story is so critical for life over the long haul. I'm not married 56 years, Sam, without failing a whole lot. And in the corporate world, you're going to fail.
You're very bold in your book, which we're not going to spend a lot of time on your book now, about your shortcomings. You're very bold in your book about talking about, even after being in this space, having this profession for 3 decades, about finding your own story at 51.
Yep.
How have you seen people that are trying to do good, but if they don't know their story, they're just hurting people more, maybe at times?
Well, let's take the church, for example. When there are leaders like elders in the church who get offenses for one another and they don't process that trickles down into the community. If leadership doesn't know how to process relationships with the Christ that I know at the center, the body of Christ is hurt. And I've seen it. And it's incredibly detrimental, but people don't talk about it. They just leave. They just leave. Nobody talks about it. Nobody confronts the leaders. The people just leave. In families, people hold offenses, Sam. They do it in the corporate world. They do it in the church. If you don't understand your story, you can't process your own failure, because if you work out relationships, you got to know how to own your own stuff. When you're wrong, admit it.
Is that what's given you the freedom to be honest about your own self and then still live with, it seems like, a sense of vigor?
I like living with me. I like me. I forgive me. My wife likes me. My wife forgives me. She doesn't even remember things that I've done wrong in the past because she lives out of a joy. And I think what we bring to the table is hope for joy in life, regardless of the external circumstances. You can have that in the corporate world. You can have that in your own personal life, but you got to get it in your own personal life or you can't bring it to the corporate world.
Aside from scriptures, if I can say that, the only reason I say that not to reduce the significance or the inspiration or how instrumental scriptures have been to your own life, but outside of that, from a professional standpoint, who have been your top mentors, either through from a reading and studying standpoint or through a personal relationship standpoint, and who would you say has influenced your work the most?
Well, I have two groups, some living and some dead.
Right.
And some that are dead are books that I've read. I've read biographies a lot. Biographies have been the most significant. I can name George Mueller of Bristol, died in 1898. A woman by the name of Hannah Smith in the 19th century, uh, uh, her book. A guy by the name of Oswald Chambers, died at 43 in Egypt. A guy named Henry Drummond. That was it. But I had a mentor when I was in my late 20s, and I was teaching at the University of Memphis. And I'd been there 3.5 years, and I went to him and I told him my story, and I said, I think they're going to fire me. He said, I think you're right. Well, they didn't fire me, but I resigned 8 months later. So I have people who speak truth to me, who tell me the truth. And I've had mentors who said, you're right, you are wrong.
Does it make you sad in any way that you're 80 and you feel, I mean, you seem like you might live till you're 130, but you seem like you have the energy of like an 18-year-old. But does it make you sad in any way that to be 80 and not knowing whether you got 1 year, whether you got 10 years, whether you got 20 years, uh, regarding the amount of people that you're able to come in contact with and influence?
Okay, you made me think of a mentor of mine that taught me something. His name is Bob Nilsson. He's 10 years younger than me. So when Bob was 2 years old, his brother handed him a flask of what he thought was water, but was white kerosene, threw it on a fire, and Bob was burned terribly. Had 17 plastic surgeries by the time he was 17. Life was hard. His plastic surgeon was killed in a car accident. He was his best friend. And so, he just said, to hell with God, to hell with all religion. And I met him when I was teaching in Memphis State. He comes to see me. He didn't want to come to talk to me. His mama brought him to talk to me. He didn't want to talk to me. So right before he graduated, he comes to me, and he's had a resume of all A's, but he said, on the resume it says, list your friends. And he said, I don't have any friends. I got a lot of drinking buddies, but I don't have any friends. And so I pitched him my pen. I said, put my name down. And that man taught me more about life than anybody I've ever known. He died at 30. The last thing he did was tell a joke. And one day we were traveling, and he had surgery where they gave him 1 chance in 10 of coming out of the surgery. I called him to help him. This is what he told me. He said, Terry, if I live, praise God. If I die, praise God. I trust the one who loved me enough to give his son to die for me. 6 years later, he's dying. And he says to me this. Psalms 90, verse 12 says, teach us to number our days that we may have a heart of wisdom. He said, I number my days by one. Sam, I number my days by one. I listened to that young man. That was in 1980 when he died, 1981. I number my days by one. I don't know. This may be it today, but I'm having a good time talking to you.
Me too.
And I didn't plan this meeting. These buddies of mine planned it, but I live one day at a time.
So what you're saying is, I mean, to kind of bring this around to what we talked about earlier, you don't feel this sense of control about the process or the work. You're just taking it one day at a time, and you don't know how many more people you're going to be able to influence or serve or love. you're just grateful for another day to do it, and your faith kind of has helped you release this sense of over responsibility or
That's
control
right.
that can cause some where it can make some people that are effective at what they do and spend so much time doing it, it's hard for them to let it go.
You know, I came over here this morning to do this interview, and I meet Lindsay and meet the cameraman back here,
Justin,
Justin back here, and
he's a
incredible people.
producer,
When I meet a
videographer.
human being, I see the beauty of Lindsay. I see the greatness in Justin. And I go in there and sit in my office and I just kick back. And I have three things. I have a pen and I have a journal. And I started writing this haiku. And I came up with the two things today that I know. I have incredible gratitude and I have an unimaginable imagination. And I am free to let that imagination run loose. And I am so honored to get to do this. But when you read my story, I didn't grow up well, but I've been trained to overcome the trauma, but also to go into places to let anybody know who's had incredible trauma. There's not anything that you can't get through if you've got good information, knowledge, safety, and time. And and I get to participate with the creator of the universe, who happens to be my friend and who likes me at my worst.
It seems that from a from a standpoint of human nature, and I could be wrong, but it seems like at times we don't fully appreciate the experiences and the wisdom of those that have gone before us and the conclusions that they've kind of come to and the things that they have tested as fully as we should or could or benefit from. And so my point is, like, my conversation with you, anyone that will watch this, listen to this, it seems most wise, most beneficial, and most impactful to our own lives to try to act on the good that you've shared. And, more than 5 decades of work, meeting with people, loving with people of all walks of life, from sex trafficking to Holocaust survivors to people here today. A, does that make sense in any way? And B, what will need to be done, 10, 20, 30 years down the road to take this work and to take the things that you found to be very effective and take this into the next generation for these years to come?
First of all, I like your statement. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But let me tell you something, Sam. For 60 years, um, I've been seeking to know what's real and what's true and what's authentic. I have been led to books. I never read a book by choice until I was 18 and a half. And there was only one I read before that. But I've been after knowledge and what's true and what's real. And I grew up in the dark side of relationships, alcohol, adultery. I grew up in that. And my parents were good people. They were wonderful people. But Dad didn't have a father. Mother didn't have a father. All the wealth didn't make it. My grandmother was an orphan on one side. The other one was wealthy and a lot of money. But all that tragedy becomes an opportunity to ask questions. And my question was, how do I live differently where I don't do to my children what was done to me? And those questions have led me to decisions. And I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just telling you, in my 79 and a half years, there's not anybody I've ever read about or talked to that I would want to change places with than me. I love life, And I want people to live life. I think the God of the universe wants us to live in joy. And I found a way, and I want to share it. And people can take it or leave it. But they need to take a look at it, because I'm not blowing smoke. I'm telling you, I could be wrong. But up to this point, I got more friends than I can shake a stick at. I've always had friends. And but I am very grateful. And my imagination ran to how to live a life that loves to happen. How do I live that? And good gracious, I ran into people who want the same cotton-picking thing, and I listen to them. And I don't believe everything they say, but I test it.
What are some of the characteristics of people that are able to impact a large number of others because they're facilitators? They're people that are influenced by this work. They're people that have an interest or a passion for helping others similar to the way that you have. What are the types of characteristics that you see in those people that are effective at impacting the lives of others in a positive way?
Okay, it's a great question. First of all, these are people who own their life, who take responsibility for their life. Secondly, these are people who have a vision for where they want to go. They're not just meandering around. They've been captured by a vision. They pay attention to their questions, and they ask their questions.
Pay attention to the other person's.
Their questions and other people's questions, but mainly to pay attention to their own questions.
Yeah.
And how do I be the person? And there are people who have come to the conclusion that there's nothing in the world more important than a human being. And those are the people that I have found that live with wonder and with joy.
To serve others.
To
in this way.
serve others, that's right.
What must they do to grow in their skill sets and capabilities to create the most amount of impact they can for others? Like to go down this path of being somebody that can impact others while being influenced by the core story and the work and the foundation that you've laid?
Well, it's very interesting. The guy in North Carolina, he retired at 52 as a marketing executive. And he woke up, grew up in a Christian home, went to church every week, you know. The other guy is the pilot that ended up meeting me several years ago, and we worked with soldiers at PTSD. He was the pilot that killed all those people, that found his spiritual direction. And so we've come together and put together material called the Heart Table.
So you don't have to have your doctorate to do this?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Does it stand the test, though, for somebody that is well-educated?
It does. It helps if you're educated, but what you need, people who don't even have a degree can do this if they have those components.
How do more people know about it?
What?
This work.
That's what my website is developing. Materials, resources, people, books that you can go to. We're looking at being a worldwide organization that provides resources for people that are seeking things that are authentic and that are true. And what I found is in my quest, when I heard somebody speak, I said, what did he just say? And I began to move toward them. People that are seeking will find people that are seeking. I was looking for life. I was looking for hope. I was looking for how to build a family. And I was looking for people who I saw living authentically. And when they spoke, I would turn my head. You can tell when people speak from the heart and from their being, and when they're just blowing smoke, whether it's preachers or somebody selling something. People who have a heart to be authentic will find authentic people. And you seek and you'll find. You knock and the door will be open. You be an honest seeker. Not everybody has all the gifts. I don't have all the gifts. I can't stand up and speak to thousands of people, but some people can.
So you're saying that really this work, your books, your interviews, your talks, for professionals that are where this is applicable, It's for people that are already doing it. They have a heart. They have those 4 traits that you described,
Yeah.
and they watch your content. They reach out and talk to you whenever they can, whenever you're able. They read your books, your curriculum, and they'll use this work, and it'll influence.
Right. I think it's testable. I think the documents and the materials test it. Read it.
Is it frustrating to you, given that you're so relational? Like earlier, I felt like I had to I felt uncomfortable that I was being blunt because I was like trying to make sure our interview
Yeah.
started at a certain time
Right.
to at least hopefully we could end at a certain time and stay on schedule.
Right.
Because I feel accountable for the outcomes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I feel like you just have a personality where you will sit and see the dignity and value of any person. It doesn't matter where it is. Is it hard from where you're at right now to focus a lot of your time on the foundation or the underlying structure of trying to get the content and the curriculum out versus meeting with people one-on-one? Or is that inaccurate?
Well, I think the word, Sam, is I'm in transition. I have 13 grandchildren and 4 daughters, and uh, I'm committed to having time with them. So it's not like I'm letting go of something. I'm going to something, and in going to something, that means I've got to leave some things off. So what I've concentrated on, and what we're concentrating on, is providing resources for people who can do what I do. This is not rocket science, but it is a sharpened tool that put in the hands of people that are really wanting to contribute to life and to relationships. I'm committed right now to providing these resources like, this book that I think is out of about almost 40 years of finally coming together where I can hand it off to people that can use it. So I always love to meet one-on-one with people, but I got some one-on-one time with my grandchildren.
Was that hard to accept it? That you had, if you really wanted to give it the best shot you could about getting this work in front of as many people as possible, that you had to kind of maybe go against natural tendencies?
I think it's a good question. I think this has kind of evolved, the developing, like for me to have been a part of writing 3 books is outside the box, but it's sort of evolved. It's like, I need to get this available, so we need to write it down. And so out comes videos, tapes, and so I'm very thankful for that. I'm very thankful my great-grandchildren might get to see this interview. I'm excited. I've never been more excited in my life than I am now. We've lived a great life together. If I were to die today, people say, well, he was an old man, he died, he finished his life. But I feel like I'm just beginning. Now, my body tells me that I'm not, but my spirit is just so full. I feel like a little kid. That's what I feel like. But I'm not carrying the load. I've failed a lot. People fail a lot. People fail me. I fail people, but I'm forgiven. They're forgiven. So I don't carry the past. And I actually live for now and where I'm going. I'm still going somewhere.
What's the cost if your work, if the work that you've learned, tested through experience, been taught by others, what's the cost if this work doesn't go on the way that it could?
I've never thought of that question. And I have no answer for that question because I don't have any real feelings about it. I feel like I've got to do the best I can with who I am, with where I am. And if I do that, then that's what I can do. If it's of God and He wants it to go forward, He'll provide a way for it. If it's not of God, then let it die. Coaching Life Matters is just a tool for me to get to do what I love to do. I'm getting to do what I love to do. I'm getting to do it,
Yeah.
and they even pay me for it. So at 79, I'm surprised that I'm getting to do what I get to do.
What do you think it would take to get more people that are passionate about this space, that are capable of pouring into others, What do you think it'll take to get this work into as many hands of those people as possible to influence as many people as you can?
I think, Sam, if I'm true to who I am, if I'm true to what I believe, and I live out of what I really believe, if it's good and if it's helpful and if it brings light and hope to people, it'll go on. It'll go on through people. Just like I feel like my life is going on for the people that have put into my life, that I'm carrying the message that was given to me. If I've put into people's lives and it's worked and been helpful, then it'll go on, because it's really not about me. It's about something bigger than me. It's about a joy that's bigger than me. That's for everybody. This is for everybody. This this is for everybody. This is not. And there are people that are seeking, and those that are seeking might find, hey, that makes sense. You see, what I've learned is I don't do anything that doesn't make sense. If it doesn't make sense to me, I don't do it.
Yeah. What about from a generational standpoint? Take somebody that was born into a terrible situation. Let's somebody other than yourself, because I know this has happened to you. But what's the hope to transforming the story from when somebody comes into this world until when they leave the world, and then the impact that they leave behind to others by them knowing their own story, by them working through the multi-generational family system, by them working through their own subconscious and how that can affect them in their life and their decisions, but then the result or the fruit on the back end of that and what they give to their children, et cetera, or what they give to their workplace, kind of the generational impact. Is there anything to that that you could speak to that you've seen that maybe it excites you, or maybe you've seen that where you kind of rewrite the narrative, so to speak?
Well, I really want what we do to go to the next generation. I believe that the things that I hold true, that I hold most sacred, uh, I want to hand it off to the next generation. I believe that we have found a way of hope and joy, and it's within the reach of every person. And so I, at this point, am thinking about the next generation. I am thinking about my children and my children's children. So my wife and I both, uh, uh, we're looking at the word called generativity. There's a generation beyond us, and that we're aiming toward being light to them. That's our aim, is to continue to be light. There are people, all those books I listed to people they've been dead over 120 years. Their light is still going. I want to bring something to the table that people, when they read it 100 years from now, will say, you know, that guy maybe had something there I need to think about.
Mm.
So I am thinking generations ahead. I'm thinking about now, being 79, I've got to pass it off to somebody who might hear it. And I'm thinking there's going to be a few people that's going to hear it and say, I think this will be helpful.
Yeah.
And if I do that, I'll feel good. I'll feel good about that.
Carl Jung said that man cannot stand to live a meaningless life. I thought about that
Okay.
as I was preparing for my time with you.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
does that quote, has that meant much to you? Or
That's a good quote. I've never heard it or remember it.
what about meaning? When you think about what men or women really want in meaning, to me, it just seemed like there was a connection.
Yes. It's so interesting that you posed that, because what came to my mind, one of the first books I read when I was 21 was Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Right.
And he made it through the Nazi concentration camp. And a lot of people died. The reason he didn't die is because he had a vision that I'm going to tell people when I get out of this how I got through it. And that's what he did. So I'll take his thing, is I'm going to tell people how I got through it. And what he said was, you can take my body, you can take my life, you can take my wife, you can take my children, but you cannot take my mind. You cannot take my mind. And so in the fact that I still have my mind and I'm using my mind is that's for everybody. That speaks to external circumstances do not determine my meaning in life. You can't take away my meaning because I'm larger than the circumstances that I'm in. And Viktor Frankl set me on that in 1963. The way is that there's a search for a meaning. Everybody has that search. I found the one relationship that brings meaning to my life. And another man, when I was 21, put it this way. First date I had with Charlotte. This old man he said, God is closer than the blood in your veins. I went back to my room, got on my knees and said, what in the world is that? What is that? What is that? There's something larger, but there's also someone larger who brought life and joy to the world in a human being. That's what I've been on for 60 years. And it gets richer. Just like sitting in my office, getting ready for this, just sitting there quietly. I said, you got two gifts, gratitude and an imagination. And my imagination took me to love and home and peace, which I didn't grow up, particularly the peace. I had love, but peace was not a part of my home. But I married a woman who grew up in peace in her home. She knew what it was. And so I've learned from her. So, the answer is yes. I want to pass it down and have it tested. I tested it. You can test it.
Can I ask one more question?
Oh, sure.
Maybe two. You said that you've been writing each morning.
Yes.
And you shared with us something that you wrote this morning.
Yeah.
Can you read that?
I went out and got me a new journal this morning.
It's a big, nice one.
And it says, keep it real. It's so interesting. It's keep it real. So I sit in there as we're getting ready for this. And I've been doing this for about 14 years every morning. I write in response. Two gifts that I have, a great sense of gratitude and an imagination that's led me to joy. Understanding's the secret. Though it costs all that you have, seek the wisdom and insight to understand your story and his story. It's the mystery of love, rooted in relationships, modeled by one man I know who was one of us. Gratitude begins with all those who've gone before, family, friends, and mentors. Real are some in books. People who never die, some still here, some in spirit. Friendship is the gift that has been defined by love. A friendship I know, he's always glad to see me with no immediate plans for my improvement. Peace is his message, right in the middle of the storms, with power to overcome, too good to be true. That's what most people will say. But love will never give up. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry, it's been an honor to do this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.